Robert Richard Randall, who also became a seaman following his father's steps, but he never married and he never had an heir. So as he was getting older, he didn't really know what to do with all this money that he had. So he seeked counsel from some family friends, and they encouraged him that since the money came from the sea, it should be given back to the sea, and to try and create a facility that would help sailors and other seamen like himself. And he liked that idea. So he left this money to create that type of retirement facility. Ideally, at first he wanted it to be where his large farm was, which was in northern Manhattan at the time. But if you guys are familiar with Manhattan, the place they were discussing was actually where Washington Square Park is today. So at that time it was northern Manhattan. That's not what we think of today as northern Manhattan, right? But that's where he thought it would be. He passed away and his will was executed in a very comfortable or snug place for sailors to retire. So he looked elsewhere for property and found where we are now. In 1833, when Snug Harbor opened its doors to the first 37 sailors, they used Main Hall C, which we will see later on the tours, because that was the first building in Snug Harbor, so naturally people later in the tour. But this, like I mentioned, follows the tale of the Main Street. Snug Harbor quickly became a very charitable institution, and from that 37 in 1833 it grew rapidly. We're moving now more towards the 1860s, and at its peak Snug Harbor was able, as a self-sustaining community, to support about 1,000 sailors and staff members, right? So what that meant was that the baker lived here, the doctors lived here, there was a hospital here, a farm with livestock here. All the things that you would need to make a community was all on this ground. Sailors never had to leave, staff never had to leave, they lived here. So the house right here, Kay, was the house of the matron. There was a lot of laundries here. She took care of a lot of the linens, the dormitories. Her domain was pretty much this area. This building with the smokestack is where the laundry was, where all of the linens were washed, and then at the time, the great hall basement was where they stored the linen. So this was pretty much it. And the head matron was known for being a very, very large woman and stern, fraternized with any of the men on the grounds, no sailors, no staff, no anybody, that they were just supposed to do their duties and stay here. The matron was said to have 5 assistants. All 5 of them lived in this building that you guys are gonna be able to walk through, okay? So you're welcome to go to the first floor, second floor. I would encourage you to start all the way at the top and make your way down. Just turn off the lights behind you as you come down, okay? Renovated, right? This building, well, I should say structure, right? This structure is from the 1860s, but it was recently renovated and will hopefully one day be our gift shop. So you'll see that things have started to change in the inside.
Go in here, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Takes a really slow picture, so it stays.
Do not leave this home without me, I said.
There are museums that rent spaces here.
There's money coming in.
Yeah, so I can't tell you exactly anything about the financial situation, but I do know that the way Snug Harbor is kind of how it is. I know what we Snug Harbor is our resident, we still have another on it, so. I think I'll do this tour. All right, we're good?
Yeah.
Great. Either way. So I mentioned that she broke her own rule. She had an affair with a sailor we believe to be Herman Ingalls, who was very well known for being a small man. He was a very, very small man compared to the matron. And so their size difference is really important for understanding further what happens in the story. But that's who we believe she had an affair with, and they were able to keep this affair secret for quite some time. But something happened.
She got knocked up.
She got pregnant. She got pregnant, and as you know, being such a large woman, she was able to hide her pregnancy for quite some time. But they had to tell somebody because at that time they were not married. It would have been an illegitimate child, and being pregnant meant that she would lose her job. She couldn't stay at Snug Harbor anymore. So, but they couldn't go to doctors either. So they needed to seek help from somewhere else, and that brings us to our second stop in the tour. Okay?
Story gets juicy.
When I was a kid, I used to come here like on Wednesdays from Bayonne. And I remember coming here and going to class and spending the day here. Is that the building?
Yes, the art lab. That's so a lot of schools do come to the art lab for classes and
This
trips
is
like that.
1970s and 80s.
So, I'm not sure how the purpose of the building changed in that time period. I do know that they do full-time classes again with the museum too. You could have gone to any of the museums on the ground and spent the day. When I'm not giving tours, I do also work for the education department, and so I know that we for sure have classes that come and spend the day.
I just
And we do
remember
tours of the gardens and different activities with them.
This was so different. I mean, we're talking 1981 maybe. And it's so different. It's so different. I mean, they had sailors come in and talk to us.
Yes, they did. That's part of the tour. When we get to Main Hall, I'll talk about how sailors were actually on the ground until the 1970s and relocated to South.
And they would never
Carolina.
show. Oh, I'm sorry. Where are we going?
We're going straight.
They would never show us the cemetery, and then the lady just told me the cemetery's not here because I remember being fascinated by
Oh.
the cemetery.
It's here, but it's not here, right?
Okay. They would never show us. And I remember my girlfriend and I we're going to the ladies' room, and then we tried to get off, and we got caught. And this is open to the public all year round now?
Yeah. It's open, like again, New York City Parks rules from dawn till dusk, but dusk and dawn changes throughout the year.
Yes.
So,
Oh, someone's
well, it's open to the public.
I get that. I'd love to bring my daughter here one day.
It shouldn't be parked there here, but look at parks. But here we go. Beauty and history of Snug Harbor. There are some other things
I
though.
just remember it being like so wonderful.
Especially as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Our perception of the world changes into adulthood when we start to understand how things work.
Yeah.
Oh, but as a kid I can imagine this place being
Oh,
magical.
it was like, this was the coolest place in the world.
Great.
Sorry. Alright. Take out my questions.
So, this is the second stop on the tour. And so I mentioned that Snug Harbor was able to support their staff on Cottage Row. This is where the staff with like prestige lived. So the farmer lived here, the surgeon lived here, right? And the house that we're standing in front of was the butcher's house.
This was the butcher's house?
The butcher's house. But again, I told you that with this pregnancy they needed some help. They couldn't really go to a doctor.
Oh dear, she went to the butcher?
So the matron was friends with the butcher's wife. And before becoming a butcher, he actually did study medicine and decided that he liked pulling apart bodies more than he liked putting them together. So instead of going on and becoming a surgeon, he became a butcher. But with his knowledge of anatomy and of medicine, they said, well, maybe he'll be able to help. And at first, the butcher didn't really want to, and reluctantly he agreed because, of course, his wife asked him, and happy wife, happy life.
Right.
He decided to help out with this, this birth when the time came. The time inevitably came, and it was a very difficult birth. The baby was born breached with the umbilical cord wrapped around him. And so in the delivery, which was a very harsh delivery, the baby lost some oxygen and we believe was born with brain damage and also some physical damage from being actually taken care of. And the baby survived would have meant that it was a successful birth, right? But the butcher didn't feel that way. He didn't feel that way. He was very depressed. He felt like everything that this child was going to go through for his whole life was his fault and felt very responsible. So he would tell him to come back when he sobered up, right? Legend has it that one night particularly he was very drunk and very belligerent, and she had enough of him and so she like forced him out and locked the door. It was a very cold night. And so if you know how alcohol works in the body, you feel very weak. That's where he died. It's open sometimes. No one lives in this structure anymore. In fact, no one lives in these 4 cottages. The only one that's actually being occupied for residency is Cottage A, which is the Snug Harbor Artist Residency Program, where artists apply to live there rent-free for 6 months and create. And then their art is put on display, and then they leave, and another artist takes their place. Yes.
So you had said that, if they knew she was pregnant, so she gave birth. So how did she, what'd she do with hide the baby? Like, how did they,
There's more to the story.
you jumped in the
Well,
gun.
which one did the surgeon live
I
in?
have to keep you entertained for 90 minutes. Come on.
How
There's
far away
more.
was the surgeon during his birth? Did he live in one of these houses?
So yes, the surgeon's house actually is another stop on the tour.
Oh,
You
okay.
guys will get a chance
We're,
to see
we're
it.
way ahead of you.
Yeah, you will get a chance to say it. I will say that the first building, so I'm going to show you building C as part of the tour. As we're walking up, I'll point it out to it again. But the building that the Staten house, a little later, a full functioning hospital was built right behind where the White Garden is. And that's the hospital that people think of when they think of Sailor Snug Harbor. But during this time period, in the early to mid 1800s, that building was actually being used medically, and so they kept all of the business, I guess, or all of the daily life within the front 5. What we know now is the front 5.
Did they bury him, or that's part of the next part
Oh,
of
you're getting one.
Jumping the gun.
I want to hang with you. You and I think the same.
Did you just happen to have the forceps?
So I don't know how well prepared
question,
he
right?
was for this day or where he got any in order to assist with this birth.
I don't know what forceps look like then.
Oh, this.
Ooh, we got a big crowd here. You got a lot
Yes.
of,
I'm
got a
so
lot, got
happy
a lot
that
of
you have
explaining
all
to do.
these. I'm so happy that you have all these questions. The story, so the night will end with the end of the tale. So at every stop, I will reveal a little bit more.
And then
of
we
the
can
story.
ask questions afterwards.
Talk to you a little bit. So I want to get us to Main Hall C before she leaves, because that is a treat.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Go in here
So
quickly.
we're going right in here. I want to mention that this building is sometimes offered because there's working bathrooms in it. If they're going to be doing, like, say, a wedding and they need extra bathrooms somewhere to change. Sometimes we open it also for special events.
And the butcher.
In the bush. When he comes back.
Oh, that I'm not too sure about.
Should we tap on each other's back and scare the shit out of you?
Yeah, right.
Ooh, we need our lights. We need our lights now.
Oh no, she's got light.
Oh, she's got lights.
Their own lights.
Oh, she's got
So
lights.
there was a wedding today, so the rooms might be a little dressed up. You're welcome to also go to the second floor as well in this building.
So we can go up?
You can. Yes, if you would like.
I think you can start up there and come down.
Good job. He's inspecting it like he's going to build on it.
Did you take a minute when you were out, when we had the rooms? When we were in the house, did you take a minute to like chill upstairs and
Somebody had asked about the kitchen in the last one. I know for this one that the kitchen is like a little kitchenette in the rear.
Yeah.
That was put there. So originally there was no kitchenette in the rear of this cottage particularly, but I don't know where they would have
Did
done
they,
the
like,
cooking.
would the butcher have a maid? Would he?
He would not.
That's a nice building for a butcher.
He had a wife. What did he need a maid for?
Sorry.
Oh,
That was 1800s. You know it was true.
well.
Good.
Wow. They did not have maids.
But that's, for a butcher, it's a nice house.
It is a nice house.
It is.
Well, maybe
He
he
had a high
was, maybe,
status.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was considered.
he was also a medical doctor on
That's
the
right.
side, so he could have,
he could afford it,
he
right?
could
had two
afford
jobs.
it.
He had
You know,
two
he had
jobs.
two jobs.
Chickens.
Oh,
And if he got insurance coverage, he was doing really well.
So actually, what's amazing about Snug Harbor is when they thought of this, they really thought that they considered the men. They thought, well, these men have been at sea their whole life. You know, if they return back to their home port, it's probably different. Most of them didn't have family to receive them. And so things, when we think about retirement benefits, right? These didn't exist. A place to retire to.
Right.
Didn't exist at the time. This was well
Must have been like-
imagined, well ahead of its years.
And
And
what
the
was
only
the
reason-
criteria? What was the criteria for some of the people that were here? There were
So in
many.
order to seek residence in Snug Harbor, you had to sail under the U.S. flag for 10 years.
Okay.
10 years. And you had to meet 3 criteria. You had to be old, decrepit, or worn out. So at the time, old meant that
Richie,
you
you
had
would
to
have
be
made the
over
grade.
60.
I made them all.
Worn out meant that you had to have some physical
60,
ailments.
not 40.
And decrepit live at Snug Harbor here.
Yeah, all
And they were given 2 suits a year. They were taken care of. They were able to get everything that they needed on the ground. So
When they died,
they really made it snug,
when
right?
is that a pun? When a
That's why
person
it's that
died,
way.
did they take on new people, or just they never?
Place where they can live out the rest of their years. Actually, Cottage Row was where they would go down the concession with the dead body, and they would go all the way down Cottage Row to Monkey Hill, which is where the cemetery is. It's by Allison Pond. Over the years, it's been vandalized, so a lot of the headstones are gone. But it is still there. Monkey Hill is still there. And actually, I learned recently that if you thought you had a relative or knew a sailor that had lived here, you can still look them up in the records and see where they are.
Where's Allison Pond?
I don't remember the
Is it at the very end of the property?
It is not connected to this property
Oh, I see.
now. No.
How old was old? Did they say? I don't think people lived there.
Well, they were cared for. They weren't cared for.
They would rest day to day. I'm assuming they were able to bring their own personal belongings as well when they came here.
Or would they wear a jacket and tie, or would they wear?
We have some photos of old sailors, and they're all dressed very differently. Some of them are actually in a full suit. Some of them are just what we would think of as business casual. Some in t-shirts. So I think it really varies.
Places, because even now when it's warm out, when you go in there, it's so cool. But they didn't have fireplaces or anything.
Sometimes they had
Candles.
furnaces with air.
They had what?
They had air ducts with furnaces. They were.
But there were none in each of these buildings.
My left side of the road, we're gonna actually turn here and go in the rose garden.
Pretty for a wedding. Pretty for a wedding, right?
Smells really good. Right across the way they plant jasmine, and I don't know if you know, but jasmine blooms at night. Smells so pretty right here. Okay, so this is the governor's house. Well, we're in the rose garden right now, and I wanted to point out the rose garden because there is a urban legend that a couple sits over there in that love tree. Like a ghost couple. People reported seeing them. I don't really know too much about their history, but a lot of people, when they come on these tours, they're like, where's the place where the couple sits in it? For a long time, because I'm new, I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I asked, and I said, is there a story about a couple? And they're like, oh yeah, some people say that they've seen a couple sitting there. So that's a little spooky, but we're gonna go into the governor's house. We call it the governor's house. But at the time, in the 1800s, it was not yet the governor's house. This is where the surgeon lived. So he got the big house. And when we go inside, it's beautiful. I think it's one of the more beautiful houses on the property. You guys are able to go to the first and second floors, but I'm going to ask that we stay out of the attic in this one. There have been a lot of paranormal occurrences in the attic. Yesterday, I did a ghost hunt with our performance arts director, which 5 years ago, actually, they did a voice recording for fun.
Wow.
And picked up
Yeah.
a voice telling them to get out in the
Yeah.
attic. And I was like, that's very scary.
Yeah.
Also, I do want to make sure we get to our next stop because I asked somebody to come talk to you guys. And so for time's sake, we're just not going to go into the attic. Oh, that might be the girlfriend's coat. As we walk into the house,
Might be the couple.
as we walk into the house, please watch your step on these stairs outside, and as you exit, your head on the ladder. If you're tall.
Like a ladder then. Watch the ladder then. This is the entrance into the place. It's a little scary.
5 years ago, actually, they did a voice recording for fun.
Wow.
And picked up
Yeah.
a voice telling them to get out in the
Yeah.
attic. And I was like, that's very scary.
Yeah.
Also, I do want to make sure we get to our next stop because I asked somebody to come talk to you guys. And so for time's sake, we're just not going to go into the attic. Oh, that might be the girlfriend's coat. As we walk into the house,
Might be the couple.
as we walk into the house, please watch your step on these stairs outside, and as you exit, your head on the ladder. If you're tall.
Like a ladder then. Watch the ladder then. This is the entrance into the place. It's a little scary. 3 outfits, but they were really big.
Yeah.
You're lucky to
One nice, nice boiled wool jacket.
again.
Sorry.
All the lights were working yesterday.
It's pretty cold in here.
This is where Harry Potter
Was
lives.
today.
That's what they did back then.
Wow, this is quite a big.
There's a bathroom there. No, big handicap. Why would they?
Can you imagine some contractor
Somebody
coming in
living
and
here
making
in the
beautiful places? I bet you in the future there'll be more people. Closets more than you get nowadays, right?
Yes. And people didn't have that much clothes.
No, they didn't
Yeah.
really have
I had 3 outfits, but they were really big.
Yeah.
You're lucky to
One
go
nice,
for
one nice boiled wool jacket.
I just saw it. She went like, she read zigged instead
In
of
your
zig.
eyes. So we're moving along with our story.
Okay, here's story time.
Story time.
That's a really nice house.
It is,
White
isn't it gorgeous?
staircase.
I think this is one of the
There's so
most
much
beautiful
potential.
houses, right? So we know the fate that the butcher met. The wife actually felt very responsible, and after, she was really the only one left that knew about that situation, and she said, the sailor, my husband, the boy, this is nuts. Snug Harbor is crazy, I'm going back upstate. And so she actually returned home to her family in Boston, left.
Couldn't you make up a better ending, like something that we would like be scared of?
But the boy
Uh-oh.
Boy.
lived. The boy lived. And between the matron and Herman, they had to figure out what they were going to do about this situation. At this point, no one else knew. So that was kind of a plus. They could handle it in secret. And what they really feared was with the boy's physical condition, he would probably be sent off to like a mental institution at the time. They didn't know how he would be treated, and so they wanted to try and confine him, but also love him in a way that they could, in secret. So they settled on the basement of the matron's house, which was double sealed, one for soundproofing, where he would stay, and then the basement, which, when you think about the story, makes a lot of sense. No one's gonna worry about how many times the matron goes down to the basement of her own house, right? She can go as freely as she wanted to, and so that made it a very easy decision for her. And she pretty much told Herman, and he was like, okay. But over the years, the boy just got bigger, and they got older, and
Did he
when-
talk?
when
Was he,
he was-
did they know whether he spoke or not?
that I am not sure of. And
That's
so
what
as
speech
he
therapist would want.
became, they knew they were going to get older. They needed help. They needed to go to somebody else help to maybe move him or figure out another situation that would just do better for them all. And so they talked about it, and Herman came up with the idea that maybe he could trust a man of God, and they went to Reverend Quinn. With this information, they said, she thought that was a terrible idea. And she was like, don't do that. And he said, well, he has to help us, and I'll just create a story that he'll believe and make him want to help us. Why not? And he sat down with the Reverend, and the story that he came up with was that he overpowered the matron and raped her, and that this child was just, you know, a product of that, and he was coming to confess. And the Reverend, after hearing the story that that Herman came up with, thought this was impossible. He was so small, and the matron was so big, that really scared Herman. He said, "Oh, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't have trusted him." And before he could even give advice, Herman got very upset, visibly upset, stood up and said, "I know that I shouldn't trust you with this information. I don't know why I thought that you'd be able to keep this secret. You don't know what you're doing anyway." And storms out. And so he didn't really get any advice. He didn't really get, you know, any help. But now someone else knew his secret. And that ate it for a while. And that'll bring us to our next stop on the tour.
Come on, John.
I'm not losing our... Oh, that's a really cool picture. I like to try and keep them all, you know, like as we go, so that it's less work for them to do.
Attic,
But
with the lights on in the attic.
and no one turned the light on in the attic,
Nobody
did
was
we?
up there.
I'm not losing our... Oh, that's a really cool picture. I like to try and keep them all, you know, like as we go, so that it's less work for them to
In
do.
the attic,
But
with the lights on in the attic.
and no one turned the light on in the attic,
Nobody
did
was
we?
up there.
In the building?
Yeah, do I know that? Oh, it might be worth telling somebody.
Yeah, well, the Raisins have to check it anyway, so when I call them in like 30 minutes at the end of the tour,
Yeah.
I'll let them know.
But that, they shouldn't switch the lights on.
This building leaves at 7, so 5.
Alright.
So right on time.
Let's run, let's
No,
go.
no, we don't have to rush, but I'm very happy that she'll still be there. So, ask her to meet us at the front. I don't know if she's ready just yet. Okay. Up on our tour, Main Hall C. This was the first building that was put here, and the original dormitories for the original 37 sailors. We lived on the second floor, 2 rooms. On the upstairs and then on the downstairs was the dining, a library, a cafeteria, some recreation, and then it branched out to, as Snug Harbor grew and more people applied, these front 5 buildings all were dormitories. And then it expanded to add more space for recreation. When it originally opened, this also served as a small chapel. Over the years, there's been a large church on Snug Harbor, which isn't here today because it was torn down in the 50s. There was also another chapel as well. So,
You know what denomination?
I do not. That I am not 100% sure of. I'm sure that we have records, but I can't tell you off my head, and I don't want to give you the public now as the new house center and new house galleries. So artists put their art on display. The sharp artists can put their art on display. Sometimes we'll have visiting artists come and do performances. Also in this space, it's still open. Like I said, you're welcome to walk through it during the day in any of its open hours. You're gonna see the beautiful artwork on the sky, and there's some other key features in there that help to make it a more comfortable space. The wooden floors. You can see a directional would have. So there are also little flag holders at the time when sailors lived there. They could put their flag, so that was a connection to home. They just really, it overlooked, that's Bayonne, New Jersey, but during the 1800s it would have all been wetlands. They wanted to really find a comfortable space for the sailors to be happy with. So this place is historically significant for that reason. Another reason is that Captain Robert Richard Randall, the man who really dreamt up this place and willed it, when he died, he was buried in Manhattan. That's where he lived. And he was buried at the cemetery by the Bowery, Trinity Church. Once this place was established, his remains were moved to here, and his final resting place was under the obelisk behind us. With us, right? They thought that it would be very important for him to also end out trying to talk to you guys and share their experiences, because this was the original building that was here on Snug Harbor's grounds, and a lot of staff have a lot of spooky stories that they've all experienced while they were here over the years. I know I had a really creepy one when we were yeah, Main Hall C is the creepiest, so I wanted to see if they could share their stories with you. Go ahead.
We just had a creepy experience. A young person, the curtain in the attic was open. As we all walked away, someone closed it.
Oh. I didn't even notice that. That's
Yeah.
very interesting. Okay. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, the tale of the matron is a tale, but there are definitely some facts to support it. And Snug Harbor is very known for its paranormal activity and spooky occurrences. So I don't know if you guys want to share.
Okay, well, I'll go. I actually just have started working here. It was a Sunday, like ready to close up. And if you know this building, the bathrooms are like all the way in the back. So you actually have to like run over there and run back. So I'm like, all right, I'm running to the bathroom, and there's like an alleyway that you go through it, that you have to go through it to go to the bathrooms. And I'm running, and I'm on my phone. I don't know what makes me look up. And like I told them, I see this lady, this big lady in white with a tray, And then the boy just, being a boy, hopping up and down there. I was like, okay, thank you. I don't have to use the bathroom ram back. I was like,
So it's
okay, I don't have to
probably
use the
the
bathroom.
matron and her son.
That's just the thing, because it's really like a long pathway that, and I was alone, and it was like a little bit at this time,
Oh God.
so it got me spooked a little bit. Yeah. You want to go?
Okay, so I've been working here for so I've been working here for 3 years now. So I'd say I'm very friendly with the ghosts in this building. So like I'll sit at my desk and I'll hear footsteps or keys jingling. And when I first started working here, I assumed it was like a ranger walking through the building. So I'd call them on the phone and say, hey, like, were you? I'm like, okay. So I thought that was like the weirdest of it all until I decided I look up and I see like a figure in the balcony, but like, when you want to see something,
Right.
so you're like, it's not really there. So like I put the sign down, I go back to my desk, I look up and the man is still in the balcony. And at that point I'm like, oh my God, there's a person in here. How'd they get up there? But then at the same time I'm like, no one's here because I have the key and that door's locked. So they couldn't have gotten up there. So at that point, I'm like, I'm going to call the Rangers. And I'm like, if I call the Rangers, they're going to think I'm crazy. They're going to make fun of me for the next however long I work here for.
Right.
So I put that aside, let it go. And then I want to say like last December was like probably the weirdest. I was all the way in the back, down that hallway like you said. But like there's galleries beyond that hallway. It was after an event. I had locked up the front, locked up that hallway. And I had locked up all the gallery. I was in my final gallery. I was doing like just a once around just to make sure it was clean and good for the next day. And as I'm facing the back wall looking at the art, I had already secured and locked every other door in the building. And that was my cue to go. So there's just a lot of weird things like that happening.
Sure.
I don't have like particular stories or anything, but
I had already secured and locked every other door in the building. And that was my cue to go. So there's just a lot of weird things like that happening.
Sure.
I don't have like particular stories or anything, but every panel that's on the wall right here at the front door, and from the desk you can kind of see reflections of who's coming down that hallway, who's coming out of the galleries. So one day I kind of just like felt someone was behind me. So I turned around to say, oh, do you need any panel that's on the wall right here at the front door? And from the desk, you can kind of see reflections of who's coming down that hallway, who's coming out of the galleries. So one day, I kind of just like felt someone was behind me. So I turned around to say, oh, do you need any, kind of weird, but every day that I'm working here, noises, footsteps, non-stop.
The doors.
Well, a lot of them.
They'll be closed, and you're like, oh, I heard the door slam. Did someone come in? The door will still be closed, so no one came in. And it just happens like all over the building. You'll hear doors constantly slamming, keys constantly jingling, footsteps. You'll feel footsteps. It's an experience.
But a lot of them died here, right? A lot of the people that lived here must have died in their beds.
To their end of their life, right? This was supposed to be their final resting place. So I'm so happy that I don't want to take you too far away or over, but I'm so happy that you were here because while I do these tours, I'll mimic those stories and I'll say, oh, we have a staff member who told me, and it's not as convincing until you see their faces and you're like, they didn't make this up.
Use your cell phone, take a picture.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And this story. Right. So it really ate him up, that situation later. So he felt like he first, 1863, Herman decided to get his double-barrel pistol and confront the Reverend. Witnesses say that as the Reverend was leaving the chapel that morning, Herman very frantically said, I knew I could have never trusted you. If I leave you alive, you'll tell my secret. And before people could start asking about the commotion, he shot the Reverend. And then he turned the New York Times from the murder-suicide that happened at Snug Harbor.
Wow.
That's Herman?
Yes, this is Herman. I like to joke and say that the floors didn't change.
He had a nice coat.
But
He had a nice coat.
Poor Herman.
This was
What about the
Herman.
Reverend?
And
No picture of the
I will pass around just for so everybody get a chance to see. He shot himself in the jaw and blew out his jaw. So this is a picture of Herman. I'll pass that around.
Oh,
I'll also pass out the death certificates for him, and I'm pretty sure I have the Reverends as well. I'll start that this way, and I'll also pass out, I have a copy of the article, which I must say is in the tiniest print they could have given me. A copy of the original New York Times article. You guys want to pass it around and use a flashlight, maybe together too.
You can read that.
They want to protect
He really wanted to protect his love and his child.
sailor named Herman.
That said that he was killed by an inmate.
And it's the
Sounds kind of
30s.
Yes, the sailors at the time were called inmates. They were not called sailors.
must be better.
Once they registered
They
with
knew what
Snug
they were doing.
Harbor,
They knew
right
what they
here,
were doing.
Danny,
they
the sailors
were called inmates.
inmates.
Inmates?
Yeah.
Anybody want to see?
Then actually, I mentioned where's a white times. The matron has also been sighted multiple times on the ground.
Upstate. Who did you say?
Usually when you're attracting like an entity,
They don't come.
they won't come when there's a lot of noise. They won't come. And they also won't come unless the idea, the science behind it is unless you yourself, like your spirit, are very benevolent, is very peaceful, because they feel like you're
They don't do
ready
it in
to
front of-
like receive their message. So that's when people talk about like the science of ghost hunting and
Right.
spirituality and stuff. That's usually what they say they seek. So not everybody's gonna get an experience.
Also depends if they up your medication or not.
There's another person that is seen a lot in the same place, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too.
The music hall, this was originally a venue like for entertainment or?
So originally the Great Hall, where they're using right now for the wedding. Remember I told you the basement was where they kept all of the linens? Was a library there.
Want to lounge around or?
You know that as to do to stay in big years, and like I said, I don't want to give you misinformation to tell you whether they did or didn't have to attend church.
No girlfriends? Couldn't have visitors?
They could have visitors. They could have visitors. A lot of them didn't marry. A lot of them left their wives at their home port. So there was a lot of, I guess,
Fraternizer.
I think that's a little
Matron is
nuanced,
busy.
whether or not they want to, remarry or what, things like that. It is the second music hall in New York City, second to Carnegie Hall. But I think that it's just as pretty.
You said 1990?
I mean 1892.
I was
I'm
gonna
sorry.
say.
1892. My apologies. I'm a millennial. I'm a little young. I have to. There was a fatality. One of the men fell from scaffolding and did die, and so he is one of the said spirits that protects the music hall. Over the years, rangers that do their rounds late at night, like everybody was asking me, who's gonna close the governor's house? There's still lights on, and I said, oh, the rangers have to come check it. They're here and they make sure that all of the facilities are shut down. Rangers have reported, several of them, that they'll be doing their rounds and they feel the presence of a man on the second floor balcony. They've also reported getting light things like water bottles thrown at them on their rounds. And Larry, who was the director, there was a fatality. One of the men fell from scaffolding and did die. And so he is one of the said spirits that protects the music hall. Over the years, rangers that do their rounds late at night, like everybody was asking me, who's going to close the governor's house? There's still lights on. And I said, oh, the rangers have to come check it. They're here and they make sure that all of the facilities are shut down. Rangers have reported, several of them, that they'll be doing their rounds and they feel the presence of a man on the second floor balcony. They've also reported getting light things like water bottles thrown at them on their rounds. And Larry, who was the director, because those were also the ones that didn't last too long at Snug Harbor. So he really believes that they protect the music hall. But there have been several sightings and several reports, so many so that it drew national attention. And we've had people like ghost hunters and ghost adventurers come and do specials, including the music hall in the photo, in the shape of a large woman in all white, center stage. So I will pass around this picture. And it is believed that like I said, the matron is a very interesting entity, right? A very interesting character because she's seen in so many places on these grounds. She's not just seen in the matron's cottage, or she's not just seen anywhere nearby. She's probably everywhere that she had to do some sort of duty. Developed it and was like, this is so for what you guys see. She comes into the kitchen, no smell. I didn't even smell it anymore. It was just like nothing there. And she was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, man, I know this really happened to me. And that was enough to creep me out to say, yep, there are people here. And whether or not they feel comfortable enough to manifest is, I guess, up to them. But made me a believer that night. Definitely. So we can keep going on the tour. To Snug Harbor, and because of that, a lot of them walked with walkers or canes or had some additional help, and to get each other, and a lot of them were hard at hearing, very, very hard at hearing at this place, and to get each other's attention, they would just take their cane or their walker and whack each other in the shins. So that's why this is called Shinbone Alley. It's also right in between where main campus, if you will, and so this is where a lot of the sailors hung out and, you know, talked to each other. The recreation hall is right there. They spend a lot of their life there. So this spirit of Shinbone Alley that many people have reported seeing is a little girl. Little girl in a very, very fluffy dress. If you can picture Shirley Temple. That is what a lot of people report seeing in Shinbone Alley. 3 separate accounts Larry told me at different times, like different times throughout history. Some were rangers. One was who was in Shauna's position before in Main Hall C, reported seeing a child. And when you see a child, which I think is very interesting, what's the first question you're going to ask?
Are you lost?
Where are your parents, right? Like, why are you out here by yourself? Who do you belong to, right? So those are really the questions that a lot of the staff members would ask. They'd see a little girl, and they'd say, are you lost? And she'd run away. And they'd either think she's going to where she belongs, or they'd turn around and she'd run. Or she'd run and they'd start to follow her and she would turn a corner and disappear. And one of the stories the rangers said was they were in one of these buildings, I can't remember which, and they were doing their rounds, and he just mentioned to his partner, oh, when you get the little girl out from upstairs, I'll lock up. And he was like, what little girl? He's like, there's a little girl upstairs. And he was like, it's not my little girl. So now they think they found a lost girl. So they did a whole sweep of the building all over again and found nothing. So usually when I tell that, a lot of people are like, well, this was for old men. Where did the little girl came from? And that is a really good question. Nobody knows. I've asked tons of people. Nobody knows. It could have been another legitimate child. It could have also been a community member. The church that was torn down in the 50s, a lot of people came from off-campus. Spirits don't have to be from a place to attach to a place. Maybe this is a place that feels comfortable for her. Maybe there's somebody protecting her here. We really don't know why she feels so comfortable in this place, but many people have reported seeing her. Some seeing her very in a distance and not really sure if it was a real thing, and some seeing her plain as day as the child that they thought was lost. So, very interesting.
What year did the last soldier,
The last sailor leave?
Yeah.
So this place was up and running from 1833 to around 1970. I want to say the late 60s. But like I said, I don't want to give you misinformation for some reason. I keep remembering that I read 1967, but cultural institution were relocated. The Board of Trustees purchased another section of land in Sea Level, North Carolina, and that is where the sailors moved to finish out the remainder of their life.
Why did it change? Why didn't they continue?
So I kind of jumped around, but I mentioned that there was some financial struggles at one point. So so in the beginning, this was the only real comfortable option for sailors. But with Social Security and other advantages, sailors had more options of where they wanted to go after their life at sea, where they wanted to retire to, what they were entitled to change. And so enrollment got lower here. Another thing that added was that the funding that was coming in, because it was a really well-known charitable institution, that changed during the Great Depression. And so when less money was coming in, they started to sell off parcels of land and stop upkeeping some of the buildings because they decided that they wanted to continue to maintain the same caliber of life, that same lifestyle that they got the sailors used to. They wanted to choose the men instead. So they were going to forfeit some of those things to keep costs low. When that church was really demolished in the 50s, that's what really woke everybody up, because it was a community space. And they said, whoa, like Snug Harbor is disappearing before our eyes, it's changing before our eyes. We want to make sure that this is here to stay. And so in the landmark movement, community members fought to protect the front 5. These are landmarked buildings. This is the largest collection of landmarked buildings in a space in the United States. So you have the front 5 landmarked and protected, and then the city also stepped in and purchased the remaining acreage. So the 86 acres that we have today that makes up Snug Harbor is city property. And that's what prevented any developers from developing on it. It took them a couple years to acquire it, but they acquired the remaining 86 acres. And so that's why we have Snug Harbor the way it is now. But that's also one of the reasons why they stopped catering to sailors. Over the years, they decided that this was going to be a cultural institution to kind of meet some of those requirements for the city. So the 2 departments that I mentioned at the beginning of the tour that do have a hand in Snug Harbor is the Parks Department, the Department of Parks, and the Department of Cultural Affairs. So the requirements and all the things that they do to maintain the buildings, what they can do, what they can't do, all the legalities is way beyond my pay grade. Yeah. But I do know that they contribute to making this place as beautiful and run as smoothly as it is today. We're getting to the matron. What happened to the matron? That is our last stop in our tour, so we're wrapping up. Landmarking and protecting like historic sites was like a very big like political move at one point. So I know that a lot of politicians really got involved with keeping Snug Harbor the way it was. Very pretty. Yeah, I just noticed it when you said that. It's very nice. Hey.
She's running, so she's slow. I'm gonna laugh. I'm not gonna help you up. We can run it. I'll laugh it down. She'll be all right.
Right. So what happened to the matron? We know what happened to Herman, but we do not know what happened to the matron. She might be there. But the story of the matron. So news quickly spread of a murder-suicide at Snug Harbor. It drew a lot of attention to the front five. And so it didn't take long for the news to spread to the matron. So she stopped what she was doing and she said, oh no, it was Herman. He in the boy. Nobody's after him. Let me make sure that he's okay. And so her adrenaline is going. She doesn't know what's happening. And so she rushes back here to check on the boy. Rushes in so fast she doesn't know she left herself in the basement. Opens to see that the boy is doing fine. And when she sees the boy, she immediately started crying. Just overflooded with emotion, started crying, was very happy that he was there, and very sad that Herman was dead. Just a mix of things going on there. And she cried. She didn't realize that the boy had slipped out. And so when she stopped crying, she said, oh no, where'd he go? Now I mentioned that the basement was double locked. So she had locked herself into the first door, but that one in between was still open, and so she started looking around the basement for the boy. And he didn't really want to go back in that room. So when she found him, he freaked out and stabbed her with a rusty pair of scissors. But then he stabbed her again and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And he didn't stop stabbing her until somebody came to her aid, heard her screaming, and response, he realized he did something wrong and took off. Came out the basement through back doors from the basement, like the hurricane doors, and ran from the back of the matron's cottage all the way up towards the direction of Monkey Hill, towards the cemetery. In his adolescent years, he was in his teens, so all they saw was this young man who would stay where that cone out. There was a tree there that was cut down maybe 10 years ago, so it was here fairly recent, and it got cut down, but they hung him from that tree, and so all in the same day, they all died.
Was he locked in the basement or he could go out?
He was locked in the basement.
So he was crazy. He was kept as a prisoner.
He was locked in the basement, so when he got a chance to see that there was more than just that room in the basement, he really didn't want to go back. And so she was trying to get him to go back, and he was like, I'm not going! Ah! And stabbed her, and continued to stab her. Right? And so the legend has it that as media started coming to the murder-suicide, the board came first and said, oh my God, everybody's dead. It's Snug Harbor. We got to move these bodies. It was very hard since there were so many witnesses to the front, the murder-suicide. The press was there. They owned up to those. But the other two, the matron and the boy, they kept hush. They moved the bodies quietly that day and then buried them in Monkey Hill without headstones.
What year was that?
So we're talking about 1863. 1863. And so a lot of people ask me about their records, and the boy was definitely kept a secret. So I'm not sure what happened to the boy, but I'm sure if you check the records, you might find out who was the matron at the time. I'm sure they had a record of the staff that was at Snug Harbor. So if you did some digging, you'd probably be able to find that information. And a lot of this tale, again, it is a tale, but it's based off of some facts. So we do know the sailor, we do know the matron, we do know that he committed the murder-suicide, and then there's some spaces that we believe